everyone doing this morning?
Excellent.
Oh, come on.
Excellent.
Okay. Try and rev it up a bit.
Rev it up.
So.
You got to stand close to the mic unless you have a.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So, let's see if I can get this right. Yay. Okay, this is me. Thank you. I have a confession to make, which is hence why the picture's there. I am slightly addicted to reading personal development books. I don't know if anyone else has this problem. It's a bit embarrassing.
I obviously am not.
Well, hopefully then I'll have something that you haven't heard before to talk about, so that's good. But so after a while, it all starts to merge together. It all starts to sound the same. But occasionally you come across a piece of information that's really valuable and sticks with you. And that happened to me recently when I read a story about Warren Buffett, who hopefully most of us know who that is. Google tells me he's the most successful investor of the 20th century. So I'll go with that. And basically, the story goes, he used this executive jet service called NetJets, and over time built up a friendship with one of the pilots whose name was Mike. That's Mike. And he wanted to help Mike out. So he said, let's sit down, let's talk about your goals. And Mike said, sounds good. So they sat down. He goes, write down the 25 things you want to achieve. So Mike did. And then he said to Mike, now I want you to circle the top 5 of those things, the things that are most important to you. So Mike did again. And then they sat down and they made a plan for how Mike would achieve those 5 goals. And that meant scheduling in the time and so on. And finally, Warren Buffett goes, okay, we've got one last step. When are you going to do the other 20 things? And Mike goes, well, I mean, they're all important. I'll squeeze them into my free time. Warren Buffett said, no. No, you won't. Those go on the avoid at all costs list. Now, I read this. I started my list-making sort of demon went, no. Because I love making lists of all the exciting things I'm going to do that I never do. But that's the problem, right, is that so often we have all these ideas, we hear all these great statistics, all this information gets thrown at us all the time, especially now, and we don't know how to make the most of that. We don't know how to make the most of our resources, because really, so many things are just distractions. And in that sense, in a way, the title of my talk today is a bit misleading because I don't want to focus today on numbers, statistics, throwing a lot of information at you about trends, because ultimately that's not the useful thing. What I want to do is give you some tools that I find helpful working with my clients to help clarify thinking when you're making a marketing strategy, when you're talking about how you're going to allocate resource, how you're going to make the most of your budget and get high impact for low effort, ideally. So this might be a better title. I don't know. You can tell me afterwards. So there's sort of 3 steps that I think are really key when we're talking about this. The first is around goals. It's that moment when Mike sits down and he writes the list of 25 things. How do we get to that list? So always start with the what. What do you want to achieve? Now, let's face it, we're all businesses, so we want to make money. But ultimately, that's not a good enough answer because it doesn't tell us how. So you want to get a bit more granular. Today I want to use an example of one of my former clients. They're a B2B software as a service company, and they actually sell software for testing software. So that's fun. But basically, so they were faced with this question, which is, how can we make more money? And I mean, there's sort of a fixed number of things, really, at the end of the day, that can make you more money. Getting more customers, selling them more things, upselling the customers you already have, getting people from a fixed project to a retainer, things like that. For my clients, it was about getting more new contracts because obviously the contracts are quite large, they're enterprise level. So that's where we were going to focus. But what did we do with that afterwards? So the first step here, how many people in this room have ever had a conversation with a 3-year-old? And their favorite word is why. Why is the sky blue? Why are you wearing that? Why? And so what you need to do at this point is become that that toddler, and make sure that you're asking why again and again and again until you get the answer you need. Is anyone here familiar with the 5 whys concept? It's another sort of my self-help personal development reading. The idea behind this is you ask yourself why 5 times. And if after 5 iterations of this question you don't have a solid answer that's satisfactory, then it's not the right answer. So when we're looking at writing down all these goals at the outset, this is a brainstorm, this is a dump. You want to get as much on paper as possible, but then you want to start making sure it makes sense. So sense check it by asking the 5 whys. If it passes the test, great, put it on the list. So this is the first stage of the first step. If you're with me so far, congratulations. It's not easy. So the next question, though, is how? How do we achieve these goals day to day? Because it's all very well going get more contracts, that's great, yay. That doesn't do it for us. So again, using the example of my client, we were looking at getting them more qualified leads via their website, among other activities that we could look at. Now, I should note here, that's not actually an activity. It's more like a sub-goal. And the way you know the difference is the activity is something you know you go into work in the morning and you can sit down and start working on it, and you know what the action is. So this is more sort of the second level. Sometimes you have to ask the how again a few times. This is time-consuming, but so important to get right. So many of my clients don't. They come to us, they go, we want to have a Twitter account. And I say, why? And they go, well, aren't I supposed to? Maybe. Why? Be a toddler. So again, you know, that how isn't quite satisfactory, so we can ask it again, right? How can we achieve this goal of more leads to the website? One of the answers we came up with, and this is an activity, you'll see the difference in a minute, leverage offline marketing activities for online benefits. And the example here is they exhibited at a lot of software expos, but they weren't capturing any of the information in a digital format. They were getting business cards, but not signing people up to the email list. So that was one step that we put on this list of possible things that we could be working on, just to make sure that they're getting the most benefit. Because again, they're a small company, they have a tiny team, tiny budget, they don't have time to like go out and do the sort of things that someone with a Coke budget or you know, one of those companies can do. So they have to be looking strategically at things which can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, effectively. And again, you ask why, right? So what we end up with at the end of this stage is this sort of iterative process that looks like a brainstorm followed by your list of these high-level goals, and then you ask why to make sure that they're right. Then you brainstorm again about how. Again, you ask why. If it doesn't give you an action at the end of it, you might need to ask how again. And what you come out with at the end of this is sort of a list that says these are all the possible things we could do in order to make more money, and these are the ways we could get there. And this is the example that I've given you already. So what do we want to do? That's the goal. We want to increase the number of qualified leads coming through the website. Why? A few reasons here. Increase the number of new contracts. Also, the average contract value, for instance, might be $100,000 a year. So that is the quickest way to make additional revenue, is by selling more contracts rather than trying to do a small upsell. And we find that the customers tend to stay with a provider because they're enterprise. It's hard to get things moving. So once you've settled on a provider, you want to stay with them. But then we have the how, which is we're going to start looking at leveraging these offline activities, these exhibitions, to get email signups, get people into that funnel. So this is just a summary of what we've just gone through. Whew, is everyone with me? Great. So moving on to the second step, this is where we get to do the thing that Warren Buffett had Mike do, where he circles the top 5, right? How do we get to those top 5? Because it's not as easy when it's a business. It's easier when it's your personal goals. You can sort of do it quickly. But this, again, takes some time and thought. And the tool that I like to use at this stage is something called the effort over impact framework. This is a really helpful, it's sort of a quick and dirty way. It's not going to get you every nuance, but it's a good place to start. And what this is you take that list you made in the previous step and assign each activity on your list a score from 1 to 3 for effort and for impact, as you see here. It's fairly simple. So here is, again, my clients. We're looking at getting more qualified leads through the website. And here I've given 3 possible activities that could help us do that. So we could run paid advertising on LinkedIn because they have a clear idea of who their target market is in terms of job titles. We could build a social media community around brand awareness, yay! Or we could use existing offline efforts for online leverage. And I've scored each one of these out of 1 to 3 for effort and for impact. And what do we do with these scores? Well, I've got a little chart here. Again, not very nuanced, but basically the short version is the reds go on the avoid list, the greens go on the list of things we want to do, yellow you might need to think about a bit. And this is how that plays out for this one. Now, obviously, this isn't going to answer everything, but it's a starting point, and that's what we're trying to get to at this stage, is just figuring out what we can eliminate quickly, what we can definitely know goes on that list. If you're not sure of the impact or effort, you might need to ask someone like a developer or someone in terms of what that will entail, because every website's different. This is, again, why I'm not giving you, specific, go out and do this, everyone, because that is not useful. What's useful is knowing your own business and knowing what works for you and what's doable. And there will be other factors as well, such as risk. You might not know the effort or the impact because it may not be able to be predicted. It may not be guaranteed. You might have to deal with factors like cost or lack of expertise in-house. So these will come into play as well when you're making that list. And so this is sort of a summary of this step. Is you've gone from having that what, which is your big brainstorm, to scoring it all with this effort over impact framework. And if you're not sure, ask an expert. And we haven't forgotten the other factors. Now what we're trying to get to with this is a list of 1 to 3 top goals, because ultimately that, in my experience, is all any one team can look at any one time. And if you're trying to do more than that, you won't work. So you want 1 to 3 top goals, and then the activities underneath that you're going to try and do, and then put them on your timeline. So if you're doing a roadmap or something, put them in according to the amount of effort needed. It's fairly obvious, but again, it's something that requires putting in the work. So this feels a little bit like a cheat to go, the final step is to just focus, but I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure many of you will have this experience, a client or my point of contact CEO comes in and they say, oh, I've just read that Google's doing something new with this algorithm thing, and I think we should do something about that.
Happens every day.
Exactly. So the beauty of what you've done up to this point is you've developed this plan that's agreed on, and it's not foolproof, and things come up, and sometimes you do need to change the focus, but it helps you have something to go back to them with and go, no, we agreed on this. This is what we need to do in order to achieve those goals we set. If we don't do that, then we have to deal with the fact that the goalpost is shifted. And this is a lesson we learn from every horror movie ever. Don't go off the path, or you will die. So that's my message to you all today. Don't go off the path, you will die. Feel free to use that.
So let me ask you a couple questions.
Yeah.
You're in these client situations all the time. Clients come in, just like you said, they want to shift you off the path. How do you rein them back in? What's your technique for saying, we set this goal out, we're going to stay on the path. How do you rein in those people who want to wander and then go into the woods? Besides telling them that they will die if they do that.
Well,
I think that'd be a strong statement, but I'm not sure you say that very often.
Fair enough. Largely people tend to come in 2 sort of types with this sort of thing. There's very analytical people. There's very big picture people.
Who do you like dealing more with? Which do you prefer to deal with more? The analytics, the analysts, or the big pictures? Yeah. I think as long as you understand how to speak the same language as the person you're talking to, then it will be a positive experience. And if you don't,
then you'll just be frustrated all the time because you'll be trying to express something and they don't understand what you're saying. So to quickly answer the question about how you go back to them with this, you know, for people who are very numbers focused, the best thing to do is just say, look, we set these goals. We expect this outcome in terms of revenue, in terms of the KPIs we've set. If we're shifting away from that, it's going to impact that. Are you happy to take that hit? Are you happy for it not, you know, to get to this point that we thought we were going to get to?
And then there's a time issue of going back and reformulating as well.
Yeah.
You always explain that too?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes with the more big picture people, that can be more challenging because they are excited by this big idea that they've come in with.
The novelty of their big
and
idea.
Yeah, so with that, again, if possible, and it's not always going to be possible, but what you want to do is just say, look, this was the original vision that you had, that we agreed. Let's not get distracted by something shiny and miss the big, you know.
But everybody's
thing.
attracted to that shiny new object.
Oh yeah.
Right. How do you take expectations beforehand? Do you crank them down so that you know you're going to meet them, so that you raise your own internal confidence that you're going to meet or exceed those numbers? Because I would think there's this always give and take, you know, right? That the client wants more and you want to back it off and you want to make sure you're successful, right? And they're successful. Tell us about how you go through that process.
Well, yeah, okay. I had a client recently who we do, part of the work we do is creative link building content. And we had set these KPIs that were fairly modest, and it smashed through them and succeeded. They went way above what we'd expected. And I went back to him after that. I said, here's the results, not typical. Don't expect this every time. He came back, he goes, well, I'm going to.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can't really manage those sorts of expectations. But what I would try to do is you go with the thing that you think you can do.
Yeah. And then
hopefully
you multiply that times 80%, so that you know you're going to make them, and then they're going to come back and ask for more, and then you raise it back up to where you thought you'd get it. Right? That's sort of the process. Yeah. Any questions out there in the audience? There's one. It's Eric. Eric's got a question.
Yes, regarding the effort impact metrics or framework.
Oh, yes.
I assume that effort is quite easy to assess. But what about the impact? How to assess or predict the impact of a marketing program? Or
So again, I mean, this is the issue with any framework like this. It's going to be actually very individual to your business. And to what you're sort of used to getting. But the way I sort of would define it, I'm trying to think if I, unfortunately I don't have the slide nearby that had it for the client, but off the top of my head I might be able to remember. So if we take that example we were looking at before, we had LinkedIn advertising to get more leads to the website, qualified leads, that was part of it. We had the social community idea. We had the leveraging online efforts, which actually was a slightly lower impact in that it wasn't going to be necessarily as immediate, the results, because it's something that they have salespeople who are getting business cards and those sorts of things. But in their case, the effort actually became more important because they had one person doing all the marketing who was a junior employee and also working as PA to the CEO. And my main point of contact was the CTO at the company who obviously didn't have time. So yeah, unfortunately I can't give a very specific answer to that because it is so unique. But I think it's sort of around what I would say high impact is something that will significantly change your bottom line. And what significant is to you is going to vary. And then sort of low impact is something that might very slightly move the needle, but it's not going to be terribly noticeable. And then the middle ones in between.
All right. So Before you go, how many times do you check Facebook
A lot.
a day?
A lot.
More than 14?
Should I admit to this?
But
I check it a lot.
a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you very much. What's that? You can sit up there if you'd like. Sure, join us up there. Next up is Carrie Cullen Baldwin. Carrie was my parting mate the other night in Dublin at the Temple Bar and other places of fun and excitement. So I think she's recovered from 2 nights ago, yeah? Yeah, she's good to go. Carrie, the podium's all yours.
All right, so what we're going to talk about next is really the change in the landscape of the various products that have come online over the past 10 to 15 years and how we've responded to that marketplace, how the small business has matured, and how our sales forces have had to adapt to adjust to what SMBs are now looking for. Go.
Big green button in the middle.
I got it.
No,
big one. Okay.
You are correct about this.
Yes. So first, did everyone have a great time last night? Yes. Is there a favorite floor that everyone had at the museum? Guessing it was number 7.
I never got to number 7. Is that 108 or is that the top?
That's the top.
Oh, I never
I
got
didn't
there.
get to the top. I love the 7th floor, but I can tell you even more, I love the advertising floor. And this is one of my probably favorite ads of all time, not just because I love Guinness, but because I love the message that it gives. Guinness is good for you. It's not debatable. They're not telling you how you might want to think about it. They're not trying to give you an idea or a concept. They're just flat out telling you Guinness is good for you. Now, what's interesting about this ad, and Guinness has done multiple ads that are similar to this. Black is Beautiful was another one. Guinness for Strength, that's a great one as well. And I think one of my other personal favorites, Why Have One When Two Can Do? That's a great ad as well. But when we think about Guinness is good for you, it actually makes me think a little bit about how we have been treating small businesses over the past several years. With so many products that are coming online, we tend to reach out to them, offer them products, and just say, you need this, right? So we've been telling them what they need. Websites, pay-per-click, SEO, video, Facebook, Twitter, reputation monitoring, you need leads, you need an app, right?
I now need an aspirin if I'm the small business owner.
You do,
Yes.
right, you do.
Yes.
And so with so many products that are in the marketplace, we need to figure out, are we really offering the right products to the right small business? The amount of products that have come online has also been very, very rapid. And so it's very easy for a business to get distracted by whatever is the latest and greatest as well. So do we really know what it is that they need? What are they looking for? And here we have a nice discerning woman looking through the grocery market trying to figure out what it is that she's looking for. But are we able to offer the correct product to the correct business? Over time, businesses are getting savvier. The discussions with them are absolutely changing. We're not able just to say you need a website or you need a Facebook page. We have to really understand what that business's goals are. We have to be much more consultative. I like to use the example of a freight forwarding company, maybe a shipping transport company. If I'm going to consult with them and find out exactly what their needs are, I'm going to have to ask them a series of very specific questions I would ask them versus maybe a lawyer or a dentist or a pest control firm, right? I'm going to want to ask them, what types of freight do you specialize in? Is it flatbed freight? Is it enclosed carrier? Is it refrigerated? Do you do international shipping? Do you prefer air cargo? Do you prefer intermodal rail? These are the types of questions that they expect us to ask them versus just simply saying, I'm going to run a pay-per-click search campaign for you and it's going to be good for you, right? We can't ask them those types of questions anymore. We can't tell them what it is they need. We have to find out through consultative questioning. So one size does not fit all. So one of the things that we are constructing at web.com is a more consultative approach from a sales aspect, and that's getting a little bit more verticalized in the conversations. Being able to ask, again, to a pest control company, a series of questions that make sense for them. To the lawyer, what do they specialize in? Where do their clients tend to come from? If I'm talking to an auto maintenance firm, I really better understand what their highest margin product is that they serve. Is it brakes? Is it transmissions? Because if I don't know that, there's no way I can put together a campaign that's wholly perfect for them. SMEs are increasingly educated and discerning. The space is maturing quite rapidly when it comes to small businesses for a number of factors. One is many of them have tried things on their own, so they've dabbled in different products. They've used other firms. I think we all know that when we talk to our customers that they probably get at least 10 different sales calls every month from telemarketers or other people that are knocking on their door. So we know it's a very, very competitive space.
They're lucky if they only get 10, I think.
Some of them are good at call blocking now, I think.
Yeah.
But because of this, because of the experience that they have and the number of products that they've used over time, and some of them unfortunately doing it themselves, they become very discerning, which means that our job in the sales side is that much harder. We can't just tell them what it is they need, even though we might intrinsically know what that is. We have to really consult with them, ask the right questions to make sure that they're going to trust us at the same time. If we're not asking the right questions, they're going to go with the vendor that actually does. One of the things that we're finding as well is over time transparency is actually almost a burden, I think, in some respects. When you look at the amount of data a business has access to, whether it's their website analytics data, SEO ranking data, pay-per-click data, social media data, the more data they have, I think as an industry we thought that's really good to share it with them so that they can understand what is their ROI, what are they getting out of this, right? But it raises more questions for them. And so when they look at the data, and Bridget, I'm sure you experience this quite a bit as well, they're going to have more questions. Why didn't I hit the KPIs? If I exceeded it this time, why can't I exceed it again? What does that click-through rate actually mean for my business? Someone else is telling me a different answer. And so because of that, ROI ends up being the next challenge for us. Before we really could just sell a website, we could just sell an SEO package. It's very similar to a printed Yellow Pages ad. You just know you had to have it, right? Now, you don't have to have all of these different digital media offerings. Now the SMB is becoming much more discerning, and they want to know which of these offerings really does provide the best ROI for them. And in many cases, ROI is very hard to prove. Social media is probably one of the toughest places to prove ROI. Just looking at, say, a Facebook page, how many people like the page or comment on it, isn't necessarily enough, right? We have to be able to prove that the marketing spend for any particular product is actually resulting in new revenue for that business. Choices are very overwhelming. Again, I think Deutsche Telekom had a great example of selling over 30 products. If I'm a small business, I might just give up. And I saw an interesting stat the other day. A third of small businesses would consider themselves very uneducated when it comes to the digital space. And what happens then is they just kind of don't do anything. You can have a conversation with them, but if they don't have the trust, they might not do business with you. But it also means they're not researching it either. So they're not really interested in what the newest offering may be. So consultation is really important. So again, it's going back to almost a verticalized approach. In speaking with businesses, it's asking the right questions. It's making sure that, and here's something that we used to do, I have to admit to. Our claim to fame was originally building websites, so do-it-for-me websites. And sales reps were very, very scripted on any given product. Call out to a prospect, go through the script. Somebody already had a website and it was good, it didn't matter, we'd still go through the script and try and sell them a website. That doesn't make very much sense. But imagine if you had a sales rep that could easily pivot and say, great, I see you have a website, but you know what, your ranking isn't that great. We can help you increase your organic rankings. Or you know what, I see that your top competitors are all doing paid search advertising. It looks like they're doing really well at it. Maybe you should consider that as well. And so that's the shift that we're making today, is looking at a customer, figuring out what they're doing online. And Buzzboard does a great job of that. We actually use similar tools, but in-house built. But we're trying to analyze and understand what is the state of that small business today before we even get on the phone with them. What are they doing well? What are they not doing so well? So that when we do pick up the phone and talk to them, we're pitching the right product, and we're able to pivot very quickly. Now, again, on the sales side, one of the difficult things, and we already talked about that a little bit earlier this morning, is how do you train a sales staff to actually be able to sell 10, 15, 20 products? It's incredibly difficult. And we're doing a little bit of a consolidation ourselves. Generally speaking, you would have sales reps that specialize in maybe one or two individual products. When you do that, they could be very good at it. However, it's much more difficult for them to pivot and sell something else. You could simply say, let me transfer you over to the SEO team. But let's think about that for a second. A typical sales rep wants to make a sale. He doesn't want to give it away to a colleague. And so the best thing that we can do is make sure that our sales reps are trained in any number of products so that they can go ahead and offer what is most appropriate at the time. So a little bit of a recap on what small businesses want. They want us to intrinsically know their business. They want to know that whoever they're talking to on the phone understands them, what their needs are, and is just kind of going from a script that's very generic or very general. We need to understand exactly what that industry needs, what their competition looks like, what their landscape looks like, so that we can ask the right questions. And it's actually fairly easy to provide a list of questions on a vertical basis to a sales rep. Once they have that, they sound a lot more educated than they would otherwise. So from a management standpoint, it's really important for us to make sure we give them those appropriate tools in the front end. We want to make sure that we're asking all the right questions, and I mean ask a lot of questions. The more questions you ask a small business, the greater they're going to know that your interest in them is, versus simply telling them what they need, talking from a script, just trying to guide the conversation in any specific direction. Ask them a lot of questions, understand what their needs are. Make sure we're selling the right product. What happens if we don't sell the right product? They're going to churn off rapidly, right? It's much better to sell them the correct product up front, establish credibility with the company, and then you can upsell additional products later on. And set the right expectation, right? So we have to be really cautious about what those results are going to be of any given product. One of the things that we do with anything on the organic or paid search side of the house is we actually leverage all of our internal data so that if we're going to sell a program to a customer, we will know by region and by category exactly what they should expect for their budget. And we do use kind of an 80 rule. We give a range, we give a low, we give a high. So we actually have our kind of a minimum of what we expect over to and even an exceed standpoint. And then we find that we generally fall within that frame. So using our actual own data in-house has really, really been successful for us. And so how do we do these types of things? It really starts with the management team. If you do not have a strong sales management team, you are going to fail. Strong sales management means that they understand the products. They are on top of the sales reps. They have very rigid guidelines for what a sales rep should be achieving on any given day, whether it's door knocks if you're feet on the street or if it's phone calls if you're on the telesales force. But we know there's any type of ratio between how many contacts you have to make to how many sales that you're going to make. If you have a strong management team, they're going to ensure that that is occurring and ensure that their sales reps are trained accordingly. Sales reps have to be more educated than ever. It's not enough now to divide a sales force and have them conquer various products. They now have to be able to talk about any type of product, especially your feet on the street reps. So we're divided up about 75% are telesales, 25% are actually premise reps out on the street. Those premise reps, of course, have a highly consultative approach because they are one-to-one. They're having those very specific discussions. And it's that sales force that, interesting enough, we started off with just one bundled product, and we've been expanding that one over time with great success. Because we're finding as we're talking with a business sitting down one-on-one, they will have questions about all kinds of other things. It's also a great way to understand what are the other products that we don't offer today that maybe we should go ahead and incorporate into our suite. Tools for sales. It is not enough to train a sales rep. They're going to need tools to make sure that their job is effective and efficient. And again, for us, it is being able to provide information up front about their prospects so that they know what should I be pitching to them when I actually do get on the phone. It's also being able to have all of the data in the back end that tells them, here's what the ROI should be, here's what the results should be from any given type of budget or campaign. And then selling vertically. This is something that we do not do so much specifically. For example, we don't align our sales forces by verticals. However, we do have sales reps who are just intrinsically knowledgeable about certain verticals, especially in our feet on the street sales teams, in which case we do have them focus. I think one of the drawbacks if you were trying to go fully vertically is that you may have some markets that get saturated, and then you have a sales rep. What are they going to do next, right? You could position and move them around geographically. That's a possibility. But being able to have a sales force that sounds knowledgeable and credible on the phone across any type of vertical, so a horizontal play, is a little bit more efficient. And if we can do all of those things, we can then say digital is good for you. Questions?
Great, thank you. Have a seat. I already peppered Bridget with some questions, so let's go to Carrie. The notion of vertical, I've been pitching this for a long time. When we talk about verticals, it can be a broad vertical, and they can still get it. Like, I think there are probably 5 broad verticals: auto-related, personal services, you know, that's beauty salons and that stuff. I think there's health-related. I think of home service-related, and maybe there's professional services. You can sort of do it into 5 buckets. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. We actually, on our home services team, that is one area where we actually have a pretty large team that does devote to that.
Uh-huh.
And we have a product we call Renovation Experts. It's lead generation specifically in home services. These are sales reps that over the past couple of years we've actually been cross-trained to sell other products. So it's said it's not just lead generation, but it is also now websites, SEO, social, PPC, et cetera. And so what we've been finding over time is that I think there's always been a hesitancy amongst the industry to cross-train sales reps or have them sell multiple products or multiple verticals. But what we find is, and increasingly so on the telesales side, is that it's actually a lot easier than we thought it would be. Once a sales rep gets their feet wet, they get comfortable with something, they will absolutely go after it.
Because confidence is everything, right?
Absolutely.
So you know, not to pick at asking too many questions with the customer, but it seems to me that it's also about providing some information back to that customer in the context of those questions. It's not just, you know, I got 20 questions I got to ask you. How do you do that? You know, there's an art to that, right?
Right. And that's, I think, again, where it comes to being educated about a particular industry is really helpful.
Yeah.
So again, if we take the case of freight forwarding, for the folks that we have that do specialize in that particular vertical, they're very knowledgeable about it. And a lot of that knowledge actually comes from the first place talking with the small businesses, asking questions of them, understanding what their needs are, what their desires are, what are their revenue goals, and then being able to take that information, actually repurpose it when we talk with everybody else in the space. And so there's a lot of learning that just comes from the small businesses and then gets sent right back out.
Yeah. Bridget, who do you sell to and how do you go about selling?
So we have a slightly different model because the price point is quite high.
Yeah. You're an agency, right?
Yeah, so yeah, I should say we're a marketing consulting agency, specialized in SEO and PPC, but with other services that we offer. And we actually have a non-compete policy within, because we have 3 offices, but within each office. So for instance, if we're working with an insurance company, we won't then take on another insurance client.
And what size are those customers and how do you go about finding them?
So size, usually...
Are they large, multinational insurance companies, or are they the guy who's selling insurance here in this little town?
It's not usually going to be really small businesses. I would say sort of mid-range, like mid-sized ones. So the example I gave in the presentation, they had about 60 employees in about 3 offices.
So they'd be a small business by most definitions because it goes from 1 to 100, though many are in the 1 to 10.
Yeah.
But 60 would fall in that. So how do you go about finding them?
So
word of mouth.
It's a lot
messaging?
of word of mouth and referrals. We have some partnerships actually because our original specialty was SEO, and several years ago the founders of our agency ended up partnering with SEO Moz, which is now rebranded as Moz, which if any of you are familiar with them.
Sure.
And when they transferred out of doing consulting into a tools
automation
model,
yeah,
they sort of referred their clients to us. So from there it sort of built up that we have a lot of strong case studies, and we also actually do a lot of presenting at conferences and that sort of thing and talking about our successes, and that's I think
are you one of those
presenting in blog
presenters?
posts. Yes.
Yes, yeah. I figured you did a nice job. Are there any other questions out there? I think we're up against the break. Kim?
Yeah, can I make a comment while you give that? Carrie, you're the first person I have heard say how important sales management is, okay? And really, we talk a lot about the sales reps. Talk a lot about training, and I think that's a layer sometimes that gets really forgotten. So thank you for that comment.
Well, I would just add to that. In what we see, in Buzzboard, we know which markets are going to do well with the Buzzboard platform tool because we know which sales managers are engaged. And if you get an engaged sales manager, they can leverage the technology, they can drive it through to the reps, If you get a sales manager who's waiting for their pink slip or their buyout deal, you know, forget it. It's just, it doesn't go anywhere.
Right, we find that on our premise rep teams, and we've got about 20 offices now in the U.S., the most successful ones are those managers that are the most engaged and actually will go out on sales calls very frequently with the reps versus the ones who kind of sit back in the office and try to manage from there. Absolutely.
Right. And it's kind of sad because, you know, the sales manager role has really not been talked about. We think the last mile is the rep, but maybe the last mile is the sales manager, because the reps are really just the extension of that sales manager. And too little is really addressed in all these conferences about that layer, about the training they get. Why are they a sales manager? Is that because they weren't good at selling in some cases? Is that because they don't, you know, so there are a whole set of issues, I think, that relate to that sales management layer. Because at the top you may have people who want change, and at the bottom you might have sellers who can do it, and you have this cog in the middle that either makes it happen or doesn't. So it's a great point.
30 minutes.
Warm round of applause for Carrie and Bridget. Thank you.